At first, he was just an ophthalmologist. Then he became the Pope's physician. Soon, we will uncover something shocking about Riccardo Galeazzi-Lisi. But for now, in front of his hunting estate, the body of a young woman is found. A trial begins. It quickly turns political and reaches into the heart of Italian power. Riccardo is not even under investigation. But why is his name alone enough to drag him into the center of an unprecedented judicial, political, and media scandal? And above all, why does Riccardo remain motionless, silent, staring at the one man who could save him, his friend Eugenio Pacelli, Pope Pius XII?
The trial itself came to nothing,
says Francesco Grignetti, the leading expert on this case and author of the book The Montesi Case, Sex, Power, and Death in 1950s Italy.
Seen through today's eyes, it is quite incredible how there wasn't a shred of evidence. It was all theory. There was no witness. There was no physical evidence. The autopsy on Wilma Montesi's body was not even carried out, and the little that was done was entirely questionable. The investigation was groping in the dark, and based on a suggestion that the girl had taken part in these alleged parties, had used cocaine, had felt unwell, had been abandoned on the beach, and had died there. It was all just a hypothesis. The trial was held, and everything collapsed.
All of a sudden, just as it had risen, the Montesi trial collapses. Like a set piece that was too fragile. The two supposed monsters, Piero Piccioni and Ugo Mantegna, Riccardo's close friend and business partner, are declared completely unrelated to the events. The death of Wilma Montesi remains, to this day, an absolute mystery.
I really don't believe that she went to dip her heels into the seawater and died instantly there. But that the story might be very different from how it was hypothesized, yes. Possible. Everything is possible. The truth is that, without even having a secure, solid starting point, if we don't know how she died, we're not going to get very far.
So what was the point of this whole affair, which marked Italian culture and politics? Why is it still talked about today as one of the most famous cases in the history of Italy?
One of the aspects that was most highlighted is that after that scandal, for more than 50 years, there was a tacit understanding between the parties and among Italian politicians, namely, that sexual scandals should no longer be used. Because they had proven to be so disruptive and had left behind such wreckage of men, of women, of political fortunes. In short, it was the atomic weapon, and it was better to leave sexual matters to the private sphere. We would have to wait for Berlusconi to bring the sexual scandal back into fashion in politics.
There is a very ancient Sufi tale about a certain Ornar, a wise dervish. One day, a tyrant arrested Ornar to extract the truths he had found in years of meditation. He threatened to execute Ornar unless he revealed the truth. Ornar, calm and gentle, replied, "If you release me, I will tell you not one truth, but 3. All right, but they must be real truths. No tricks." "Absolutely true," said Ornar. And he began. "The first truth is that I am Ornar, the Sufi dervish. The second is that you promised to release me if I told you the truth. The third is that you want a truth that matches, exactly, the idea you already have of the truth." They were all true, and the tyrant let him go. So it was in the Montesi case as well. The only truth the judges, the journalists, the politicians, and ultimately the entire Italian people wanted to hear was what they already suspected: that the powerful, the devout, the ministers with crosses around their necks, and the communists with l'unità, all those people who claimed to be pure, inflexible, irreproachable, were nothing more than men and women like everyone else. Corruptible and corrupted, worldly and drugged, and, above all, capable of lying, of taking pleasure, of pretending to be something they were not, just like the rest of us. Once this truth was uncovered and the catharsis complete, Montagna and Piccioni were free to return home. Mission accomplished. With no thought for poor Wilma Montesi. The problem with truth is that, once heard, it does not set you free. On the contrary, it can quarter you. Between 1954 and 1956, Riccardo perhaps discovers that truth can turn you from a witness into a defendant, from a trusted man into a foreign body. And this is where his downfall truly begins. Not only because of the public disgrace, gratuitous and disproportionate, linked to the Montesi case, but also because of a series of circumstances that, taken together, make this the most difficult 3 years of his life. The first concerns the person dearest to him, his friend, his patient, the center of his world.
Pius XII experienced stomach troubles and bouts of hiccups that only kept worsening without pause. After each episode, the pontiff was exhausted, nervous, and tired.
Riccardo writes in his autobiography, "He is the archiator. Therefore, the primary responsibility for treating Eugenio falls to him." But at this moment, many others begin to step forward. Advisors, doctors, and people of questionable reputation. Some by letter.
An old Irish gentleman of 83 years suggested dipping a sugar cube into a very ripe tomato and having the Pope chew it slowly. Another telegram contained these simple words: "Against hiccups, introduce cocaine into the nose."
But some appear in person at the bedside of Eugenio Pacelli. The most important of them all is the Swiss doctor Paul Niens, the de Gaulle of medicine, the inventor of the miraculous cell therapy.
The therapy suggested by Dr. Niens is based on the hypothesis that certain suspensions of living cells, extracted from animal organs, once they enter the bloodstream, may be able to locate the diseased homologous organ and bring about a sort of replacement of the worn or ill parts.
It is a completely pseudoscientific theory, both then and now. And it is Riccardo himself who realizes this and calls Niens a charlatan.
To be frank, I must say that I was very skeptical about the effectiveness of the therapy recommended by Dr. Niens to revitalize the organism of Pius XII. And many of my eminent colleagues, whom I had consulted about this treatment, shared my skepticism. Several foreign doctors personally came to Rome to beg me not to undertake this treatment with living cells on Pius XII. In the Vatican itself, and above all, among the members of the Curia, when news of this strange treatment project leaked out, there was astonishment and disapproval at the idea that animal cells could be injected into the Holy Father.
Riccardo shares his doubts with Eugenio. But then he tries Nihans's therapy on himself.
I had undergone that experiment so that I could definitively advise him against that therapy in which I did not believe. But having found no negative effects, honesty compelled me to tell him objectively how things stood. The Pope therefore immediately ordered that the injections be administered to him. On January 26th, Dr. Nihans injected him with living cells from the hypothalamus and the adrenal gland. The following day, the condition of the Holy Father worsened. The vomit was dark, something that had not yet occurred. Laboratory analysis of the material expelled from the stomach revealed the presence of blood. Blood was also found in his stool.
Nihans and Riccardo did not share any mutual affection. The Swiss healer seems to exert an influence over Eugenio Pacelli, who until now had been, in matters of health, an exclusive domain of Riccardo. Cruzio Hruska, the Pope's dentist, in his testimony during the beatification process of Eugenio Pacelli, would describe a very creepy scene.
At that time, I noticed a strange attitude in the Riccardo Galeazzi-Lisi. He used to meet me in the courtyard, go up with me in the elevator, and then enter with me into the room used as a dental office. The Holy Father, upon entering the office, used to bless me, greet me, and then prepare himself for the treatment without addressing Professor Galeazzi-Lisi at all. He used to stay kneeling in a corner of the room during the entire session. At first, I didn't understand the situation, but then I realized that the Riccardo was not welcome to the Holy Father, and that he stayed inside the office to give the impression that the treatments were happening under his direction.
But there's worse. Monsignor Corino Paganuzzi, whom we have already encountered, a man deeply involved in the Roman Curia and extremely close to Sister Pasqualina, speaks of the same period and recounts.
The Holy Father immediately had Professor Galeazzi-Lisi sent away and absolutely did not want to see him anymore. It happened more than once that, before leaving for a function or an audience, he would stop at the door of the library and ask us,
"Is Dr. Galeazzi here? If he is, I'm not going out."
An ecclesiastical collaborator pointed out to the Holy Father that the removal of Dr. Galeazzi-Lisi would be prejudicial to his honor and to that of his family, in addition to causing material damage. The Pope replied,
"I don't want to take away anyone's honor or livelihood. Let him stay if he wants. Just make sure I don't have to see him."
As a consequence of this, when there was a procession, Dr. Galeazzi-Lisi would suddenly appear when he was out of the Pope's sight.
If these accounts are true, then it's clear that Riccardo is going through a tragic moment. Eugenio Pacelli, his lifelong friend, is letting him go. He doesn't want to hurt him, but he can't stand him either. He keeps him around more like an enemy than a friend. The whole situation has become unbearable. Where did he go wrong? Who or what has Riccardo become? He's a Swiss charlatan and the long shadow of a murder scandal enough to destroy a legacy of trust that Riccardo has been building since 1930? He was the one who wiped his forehead during the worst nights, the one who stood by him when the Nazis were at the gates. And now, those same eyes look at him like he's a stranger. We picture Riccardo, confused, scared. It's around this time that he lets go of all control. And that's when the champagne medicine begins. Bubbly, full of nuance, intoxicating. In the Grand Hall of the Catholic Academy in Paris, Riccardo Galeazzi-Lisi takes the floor. On the table, next to his notes, he has something new to present. It is the M.B.R. 36 method. According to Riccardo, this serum could pave the way for the early diagnosis of cancer. A medical journal of the time reports,
"When cancer appears in time, it is almost always operable. And in a high percentage of cases, the patient can hope for salvation. The M.B.R. 36, without working miracles, without performing impossible wonders, will open up new prospects for doctors all over the world in the fight against man's worst enemy."
Corriere della Sera runs a very clear headline.
Galeazzi-Lisi says that cancer can be diagnosed. A blood test must be done after injecting a solution called M.B.R. 36. The Pope's doctor assures that the result is always accurate.
The article explains how Riccardo's idea works.
First, a blood sample is taken. Then the biological solution is administered daily to the patient in the form of injections. After 7 days, and after 15, other blood samples are taken, which are compared to the first. If cancer is present, the comparison will reveal it. In the case of skin tumors or their metastatic formations, M.B.R. 36 can have a curative effect, as it isolates them, and thus gives new life to the connective tissue. Galeazzi-Lisi thinks that in a few months the solution could be available for sale in pharmacies. For now, it is available only in his Roman clinic.
Riccardo ends up selling his diagnosis, or rather, his diagnosis treatment for cancer. He does so in his clinic, with the air of someone who has nothing to hide, or perhaps of someone who has nothing left to lose. After all, selling hope is just another way of taking part in the world's pain. But for a price. Then, as often happens in decisive moments, Riccardo veers off course. While presenting the definitive diagnosis for cancer at the Paris conference, he abandons the scientific register and ventures elsewhere. He begins to talk about bees. Years later, the Italian weekly L'Europeo would write,
"During the speech, after an opening on the subject of tumours, Galeazzi-Lisi unexpectedly began to talk about royal jelly, arousing strong resentment in the audience. That resentment was echoed by the French press and by some Italian newspapers. It is said that even the nuncio sent a very harsh report to Rome regarding the Archiator."
In this period, Riccardo is obsessed with royal jelly. And some swear that he receives a percentage from the sales of a royal jelly-based preparation, marketed by a French pharmaceutical company, Apicerum.
Every time I pass by the Fountain of the Bees, I do not think that it is one of the most beautiful fountains in Rome. I do not think that it is the work of Bernini, to whom we owe the Colonnade of St. Peter's. No! My tenderness goes to the bees. I truly believe they deserve a monument.
Protests pour in over this blatant promotional claim, made at a scientific conference. And Eugenio Pacelli, too, seems not to appreciate it.
Following the events in Paris, Pius XII summoned Professor Galeazzi-Lisi and, perhaps for the first time, spoke to him harshly. He told him that he should not concern himself with cancer therapy. If he truly wished to, only with early diagnosis. He urged him to be more cautious in his statements and public talks.
In 1976, the M.B.R. 36, the prodigious diagnostic and therapeutic tool presented by Riccardo, was included in the Index of File Material on Unproven Methods of Cancer Management, a document put together and published by the American Cancer Society. It lists methods, treatments, substances and devices that had been promoted as cancer cures or therapies, but that lack any solid scientific backing. In this hall of shame, one also finds
M.B.R. 36, used in biological blood test. Galeazzi-Lisi, Dr. Riccardo, deceased former physician to the Pope. Rome, Italy.
Something in Riccardo has broken. Maybe he has realized that the time for redemption is running out. That trust, once corroded, cannot be restored. Eugenio hasn't dismissed him, but he avoids him, and in the meantime, he's fading. He's older now, sick, frail. Any day could be his last. Riccardo knows it. So, what would you do? Wouldn't you start worrying about the future? Wouldn't you start making plans? What's going to happen to me soon? How will I keep living? How will I keep feeding that demon that is gambling, from which I must not, will not, and cannot separate? For now, Riccardo still has a big name, a reputation. He's still the Pope's doctor. He's a member of the very prestigious Pontifical Academy of Sciences. Maybe it's time to cash in on what he's built so far, even if it means selling a fake anti-cancer serum to the weak, or royal jelly, which, after all, doesn't hurt. Or, worst of all, actual magic. Suddenly, something very strange happens. It is a surreal story, perfect for the pages of weekly magazines. But, as has happened before, it is from this bizarre tale that, all of a sudden, and when you least expect it, the name of Riccardo Galeazzi-Lisi appears. Two charlatans begin to compete for the title of Wizard of Naples. Achille d'Angelou, that is the name of the first of the two Neapolitan magicians. And he is also the most famous. It is said that he emits a fluid from his hands that reaches the recipient without any physical contact. And once it arrives, it cures them of every ailment. The newspapers call Achille d'Angelou the Rasputin of the Italian and international jet set. There are photos of him with Sophia Loren, with Queen Maria Jose, with Federico Fellini. Among his clients is also an Italian Prime Minister, Fernando Tambroni, one of the most controversial ever. He is a phenomenon, and a phenomenon always gets people talking. But one day, a second magician arrives in Rome. His name is Luigi Doriano. He, too, calls himself the Wizard of Naples. Unlike his rival, he has no photographs with actresses, no endorsements from famous figures. He is known only to a handful of connoisseurs, and almost none of them belong to the Rome of the Dolce Vita and of Pius XII. His kingdom is the countryside. When Luigi Doriano arrives in Rome, he certainly doesn't play it safe. He wants the spotlight. He wants the title. He wants to be recognized as the true and only Wizard of Naples. Corriere della Sera, the most important newspaper in Italy, runs the headline.
He proclaims himself more of a wizard than the Wizard of Naples.
And in the body of the article, we read an explosive statement.
If Achille d'Angelou, the one who arbitrarily calls himself the Wizard of Naples, agreed to face me, I would be able to pin him to a chair for a whole week.
Challenge issued. And Achille d'Angelou, the first Wizard of Naples, takes the bait. He responds to the provocation with a defamation lawsuit. Doriano replies with legal action for unfair competition. On January 14, 1953, the newspaper L'Unità runs the headline, "The court will decide who is the Wizard of Naples." It is a real trial, with lawyers, legal briefs, speeches, and evidence. Picture the scene. Luigi Doriano asks the court to forbid Achille D'Angelo from using the title Wizard of Naples. D'Angelo defends himself with a document from 1944, signed by the Chief of Police of Naples, authorizing him to place a plaque on the door of his office, reading, "Achille D'Angelo, Wizard of Naples." The other replies with a vaguely defined document dated 1921, which would prove that Doriano was already being called Wizard of Naples by everyone at the time. A disaster. A farce. An Italian-style comedy. You may be wondering, what a serious and respected man like Riccardo Galeazzi-Lisi has to do with all this? Unfortunately for him, quite a lot. At some point, both magicians claim to be working under medical supervision. They say that every one of their treatments is accompanied by a clinical checkup, both before and after. And Achille D'Angelo, the Rasputin of Roman parlors, plays his trump card. He presents 3 certificates of merit. 3 famous signatures. One of them is his, Riccardo Galeazzi-Lisi, Pontifical Archiator. The newspaper L'Unità publishes an excerpt from the letters signed by Riccardo. It contains at least 2 statements that are, each in their own way, quite sensational.
Once again today, together with the colleagues who, like me, are members of the Italian Society of Metapsychics, I observed the study of the D'Angelo phenomenon. And once again, I was struck by his power, which can be described as unique both in terms of telekinesis and clairvoyance. I have been following Achille D'Angelo's daily work for a long time now, with scientific purposes, monitoring numerous clinical cases before and after.
The first thing we learn from this ridiculous trial is that Riccardo Galeazzi-Lisi, the Pope's personal doctor, is a member of the Italian Society of Metapsychics. What does that mean? That in his spare time, he studies paranormal phenomena like telekinesis, the ability to move objects with the mind, or clairvoyance, the ability to see things others cannot. How can the doctor of the head of the Catholic Church also be involved in magic, visions, and mysterious powers? Is there a previously unknown link between the Vatican and the world of the occult? The second thing is even stranger. Riccardo says he visits the patients of the Wizard of Naples, Achille D'Angelo, both before and after the magician meets them. So one starts to wonder, what kind of relationship do the two of them have? Do they work together? Is it possible that all of D'Angelo's clients are also clients of Galeazzi-Lisi, and that they pay both of them? Or maybe it's the other way around. Maybe Riccardo sends his own patients to D'Angelo. But then the question is, why? Is he doing it out of scientific conviction? Out of belief? Or is there money involved? The answer to these questions lies deep within the tangled roots of Italy's occult history. One has to climb through dark and winding paths to first understand what the Italian Society of Metapsychics actually was in the distant 1950s. Whether it was friend or foe to Catholic doctrine, and what role Riccardo played in it. It would be madness for someone like me, a complete outsider, to embark on such a journey into the paranormal without knowing where to step. But luckily, I found a guide. And what a guide! Professor Massimo Biondi is a full professor of psychiatry at the University of Rome. He also heads the Department of Psychiatry and Psychopharmacology at the Umberto I University Hospital in Rome. But most importantly, he is a meticulous expert in parapsychology and everything that revolves around it. When I reached out to him, this incredibly kind doctor flooded me with information about the history of Italian metapsychics and parapsychology.
Strange phenomena and behaviors, occasional and experienced by a minority of people, have been observed almost since the beginning of time.
Professor Biondi wrote to me.
Thought transmission, also known as telepathy or extrasensory perception. Clairvoyance. Poltergeist, meaning physical, material anomalies affecting one or a few people. Séances, where a medium falls into a trance and, in the dark, seems to produce impossible physical phenomena, and so on. Starting from the mid-19th century, the idea took hold that these things happen because there are gifted individuals, predisposed people, who can manifest their own energies and also become vehicles, that is, mediums, for the immaterial spirits of the dead. This doctrine, known as spiritualism, was born within Protestant Christian circles.
Hold on a second. Are we saying that Riccardo Galeazzi-Lisi, the personal doctor of Pius XII, was mixed up with mediums, spiritualists, and clairvoyants? Seriously? But what about the Catholic Church? How does it look upon all this?
The Catholic Church does not agree. In 1938, the Italian Society of Metapsychics was founded in Italy on the initiative of a neurophysiologist, Ferdinando Casamali. Into that society ended up, some almost unwillingly, many of Casamali's friends, colleagues, acquaintances, and sympathizers. Most of them were not particularly interested in metapsychics, but were perhaps fascinated by the idea of being part of a scientific body at the forefront of research.
And was Riccardo among them?
Galeazzi-Lisi joined the society, probably as a personal acquaintance of Casamali, from the very moment of its foundation. In 1939, he was elected as a member of the society's council.
But was Riccardo one of those who were dragged reluctantly into the world of metapsychics, or did he take an active part?
From an interview with a man who worked as a laboratory technician for 40 years at the Istituto Superiore di Sanità, it emerges that Galeazzi-Lisi, in the early 1950s, invited the Neapolitan magician Achille D'Angelo to undergo an experiment in the physics laboratories of the institute.
What sounds strange about this whole affair? That the Catechism of the Catholic Church, the collection of all the rules that govern the behavior of a good Catholic, is clear.
All forms of divination are to be rejected. Recourse to Satan or demons, conjuring up the dead or other practices, falsely supposed to unveil the future. Palm reading, the phenomena of clairvoyance, and recourse to mediums all conceal a desire for power over time, history, and, in the last analysis, other human beings, as well as a wish to conciliate hidden powers. They contradict the honor, respect, and loving fear that we owe to God alone.
And yet, magic has always been present in human life. Because, when life seems too chaotic or unjust, and reason is not enough to bring order to it, people look for a higher meaning that can make reality understandable. Some seek it in the sacred, others in the occult. And so, over time, magicians have become fascinating figures. Trusted healers, capable of preparing remedies with herbs, potions, and spells to heal or to fulfill desires. Charismatic and mysterious figures whose lives are often wrapped in legend. But how can the Pope's doctor get involved with this stuff, so openly anti-Catholic? How can the Pope allow it? Did the occult, spirits, poltergeists, and mediums enter the Vatican during the time of Pius XII? Truth, as the Sufi mystic Ornar teaches us, has many faces. And none of them is final. Because in the end, there is no need to turn to the Wizard of Naples. Riccardo himself, for Eugenio Pacelli, is something not so far from a wizard. He uses herbs too. He does not call them potions, but homeopathic remedies. Riccardo too is a healer, cloaked in prestige and charisma, whom the Pope trusted completely for years. And Eugenio is certainly a man who seeks in the sacred the meaning of a life that feels too chaotic and unjust. A man inclined to believe, perhaps too much, all the way to Paul Nians's animal cells or to Riccardo's mysterious remedies. And in fact, Riccardo and Eugenio, despite all the testimonies claiming they were estranged and at odds, would, in reality, remain together until the very last day. Until the deathbed. But before everything comes to an end, everything will have to change, once again. New doctors will take control. The Pope will enter a tunnel with no way out. There will be clandestine photographs and power struggles. And one absurd decision, a method of embalming never seen before. This is how Riccardo will become, against his will, the man who blew up the Pope. But his fall will be worse than anything any medium or wizard could ever have imagined. And there is still a hidden truth, one that no one has ever told. We will discover it soon.
You've just listened to the 6th episode of Riccardo, the Man Who Blew Up the Pope, a podcast by Rob Ferraro. Associate producer, Vittoria Ursi.